Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Karina. Welcome. I recently moved to New York City and I thought it would just be fun to bring along some tips and tricks I learned in the process of getting over here, because let me just tell you, it was not easy but definitely doable. The whole process of how to get an apartment in New York City, because it's definitely not what I expected and it was definitely more complicated than I expected, to say the least. So just getting straight into it, let's say you're planning on moving to New York City. This is specifically for someone, I mean, if you already live in New York City and you want to get tips and tricks from this video, you can also do that. But specifically, I moved from another state, another city in another state. So it's a little bit more complicated, like getting over here and being able to plan the whole process. But if you live here, it's the same exact thing. It'll just be a little bit more simpler, I would think. Okay, so I have a whole list of things on my phone here. So if you see me looking down, that's why. And I kind of categorized it into some sections. Before getting the apartment, the actual apartment hunt, things that we specifically looked for in an apartment, budgeting, applying for the apartment, and then maybe some questions you might want to ask and like how we specifically got our apartment. So starting off with before getting your apartment, it's super important to research the areas that you're planning on living in. There are some areas that might not be the safest, might not be as convenient. We were looking specifically around my boyfriend's school. We were also looking in the financial district, and there were a couple other areas like Murray Hill, the Lower East Side. So a good tip would be to look in Long Island City as well. Long Island City is essentially either a ferry or a subway ride over to Manhattan. It's in Queens. It's like on the corner, on the border, like right by the river. That shows you like the view of Manhattan, and it's so close, and it's so much more affordable. Like you can get way more for bang for your buck. For example, this apartment is probably the equivalent of a very small studio apartment in the financial district or in the Lower East Side. And for this amount of space, you get like your washer and dryer, you get your one bedroom, etc. So you just have to kind of evaluate what's more important for you. And to us, we valued a little bit more our space and our accessibility, I would say, convenience, and then also research like how close the subways are, more towards like the either end of Manhattan. It's harder to get around. Like if you're closer to the water on either side, there's less transportation options. If you're closer to the middle or all the way to the bottom or closer to the top, then you have way more subway options. And then based on that, you can evaluate what kinds of apartments and what areas you want to look in. Obviously, you have to evaluate what types of things in apartments you might want to look for. Something that is more rare here is, number one, having a bedroom. Number two, having air conditioner. Number three, having a washer and dryer. Washer and dryer is like rare. It's like if you get a washer and dryer, you're savage. Like, how did you even get that? Essentially, unless you want to pay like $4,000. But we ended up being able to get everything that we wanted for the price range that we wanted. But we just had to sacrifice a little bit on location, but we ended up loving the location, so that was a win-win. Another thing you might want to consider is the incentives that each apartment building might offer. When I was researching things, you kind of find out that there are like busier seasons for apartment hunting and then like less busy seasons for apartment hunting. So during the less busy seasons, which is usually around like winter time, because not as many people move during winter, you might get more incentives to move, like for example like a free month or two of rent, which ends up lowering your monthly rent by a lot. That is something you might want to consider if you have flexibility with something like that. Like Carlos and I had to move the day we had to move because he was starting school. So we just had to move in the busy season. But if you can move in a less busy season to get like a better deal on your rent, I would recommend that for sure. Now moving on to like the actual apartment hunting. Once you established the area you want, once you've established like a couple of areas you want, you know that the safety is good in the kind of areas that you want, the transportation is good, the convenience is good, you have a set of list of everything you want for your apartment to have, your non-negotiables, and then some things that you might be able to or more willing to negotiate. You want to download the app Street Easy. This app is essentially like Zillow or like an apartment hunting app that will show you apartments available in New York City, and you can actually get in contact with the brokers directly through there. there and set up viewings. If you're not local like I wasn't, you might need to plan a trip in advance to go and view apartments. You also need to make sure that you bring the necessary paperwork with you, so they might ask you for like your last bank statements, your last savings account statements, your last credit card statements, like verification of employment, verification of income. And a super important note to have is that most apartments require you to make 40 times the amount of the rent, and if there's 2-3, how many people are in the apartment, you need to make like 40 times per person. So like me and Carlos, 80 times the rent. And the thing is, like in Miami or in most places, you don't make the equivalent of what someone might make in New York, because New York gets taxed more, so they end up making more money. And it was a little bit difficult for us to get approved for an apartment, even though we were able to afford it, because of this restriction. Essentially, they wanted us to make over $200,000, and in Miami, that's just like very rare for like one person or two people to make that at such a young age, especially for such a cheap-ish apartment. Like you would think someone who makes over $200,000 would have like a super nice bougie apartment, and we're just wanting like a small 1-bedroom. So it was a little bit ridiculous. Like I think it's like really hard to get an apartment in terms of that, but luckily there is something called a guarantor. Essentially what this means is either you have a family member make 80 times the amount and they could sign for you, or there's also a couple of websites that we used called, one of them was the Guarantors and the other one was Insurant. And essentially what you do is you'll pay like a percentage of your month's rent to this website as a one-time fee, so that they have essentially like some people, I guess, that are like down to sign for you and are reliable for your rent if you don't pay it. And that's what we ended up doing. It sucks because you have to pay them for it, but it's not a big deal, because there would be just no possible way that we could have gotten approved for that. It was just like a really excessive ask and a really excessive requirement. So the next step you're gonna do is you're gonna message or request a viewing for every single apartment that you like on StreetEasy. Or this is how we did it. I mean, I'm sure there's other ways, but I don't really know what other way, unless you want to use another app. Try to look for buildings that have a no fee, like a little banner that says no fee. Essentially what this means is that you don't have to pay the broker for the viewing, or like for the like a percentage of working with, or for working with them, and it's just a free viewing and you could just view. And if you end up liking the apartment, you don't end up having to pay them out of your own pocket. The building will just handle that. So when you start requesting viewings, you can even request virtual viewings. They could send you videos of the apartment. They'll end up emailing you back saying this is the video, or we have this available, we might have something else available for you, blah blah blah. You'll be messaging with a bunch of different brokers depending on like what building you like or don't like. Once they reply to you, make sure you want to make sure to ask all the necessary questions, like does it have a washer and dryer, does it have central AC, what utilities are included, does the building have any amenities like a gym. That way you can narrow down if this is a building that might work for you before you end up spending your time and money to go and view this place, especially if you're like us and we had to travel. What we did was we ended up scheduling 3 full days of viewings. We did area by area, so like we chose a couple of our top areas, and then we scheduled like a couple of viewings in each area, and then we narrowed it down to our top 2, and we ended up applying. So finally you go and you see all your viewings, you ask all the necessary questions, and then okay, now your next step would be to apply. Okay, we saw so many apartments. Okay, like if you want, I'll insert like some videos that we took. as strict. We saw some in the Lower East Side. We saw some in Little Long Island City. We saw the one where we currently chose as well. And we were just super overwhelmed. I would definitely recommend taking a video of every single one that you see and saying which one it is, because you're for sure gonna get confused, because you're gonna see so many different apartments per day, and sometimes the buildings will give you like 4 different units to see at the same time, and you'll be like, what unit did I even see? So when you apply to the building, there's usually an application fee. You'll put your application in, you'll send in all your information. For us, we had to apply on that website for the guarantor. We used Insurant. You end up applying there, they approve you, and then they'll contact your building firsthand. Then once your building signs off, your building and the company will kind of go back and forth. They'll let you know if you got approved or not. Hopefully you do, because it's an extremely intense process that I don't even know why it's so complicated. And that's if you have a building, that's if you don't have a building with like a membership board or whatever. Those are even more intense. Probably take like 2 weeks to get approved, because they go through this whole process. It's like getting a job. It's like being admitted into an association. I don't know, it's very intense. Finally, I wanted to speak a little bit on the budgeting end of things. You definitely need to have a little bit of money saved up for this process, because it's not cheap. Number one, you will most likely need to pay a security deposit, which you will get back at the end, but it could be equivalent to 1 month of rent, and then you have to pay the first month of rent as well. So this could be, let's say your rent's $2,000, you can end up having to pay $4,000 up front. Your security deposit could vary, and your requirements could vary, but this is 95% of the requirements that I saw. It was security deposit and first month's rent. You end up having to pay that up front. You need to set up your electricity bill, you need to set up your Wi-Fi, you know, all the works. It's a lot of things that you don't even think about at first. And then obviously you need to budget for like your moving expenses. If you might want to use a moving company, if you're moving out of state like me, that I had to get like a moving truck and a van, that is just a whole other ball game. And if you want me to speak on that, I will. It's a whole other story. Comment down below, let me know. I wanted to include at the end of this video like a couple of questions that I think are super important to ask. I kind of mentioned them here and there in the video, but I want to kind of just like put them all together, because this is something that I thought was very important, could save a lot of time and energy in the process. Number one, are there any deals? And what I mean by that is like a free month of rent or 2 free months of rent. They'll give you like a free gym membership, etc., just depending on like what season they're in. And another question you want to ask is if you would be paying the net or the gross rent. What this means is essentially if you get a free month or 2 or whatever the deal is of rent, sometimes they let you they'll get like that amount divided by the 12-month or however long your lease is, and they'll subtract it from your monthly rent. That means that you would be paying the net gross amount. So let's say your rent's $3,000, you get a free month, 3,000 divided by 12, and they'll subtract it from every month's rent, and you end up paying less. If you're paying the gross amount, what they'll do is they'll usually just give you like a free month in the beginning that you don't have to pay, a free month at the end that you don't have to pay at all, but then your rent will just be the original amount. So you end up paying the same, but it's just a different way of doing it. I prefer net effective. I ended up having to pay gross anyways, but I feel like it's just better because little by little you're seeing a lower amount every month, and that just sounds better to me in my brain. I would ask what's included in my rent. What I mean by this is most of the time buildings include water payments and gas. My building includes water payment and gas, but this is not always the case. I mean, I don't really know if it's like a law. I know it's a law in New York for like your heating bill to be like taken care of by the building always, but you do have to mostly pay Wi-Fi, electricity. In most of the buildings it was Wi-Fi and electricity, but that's something that I would for sure think that you should ask before you commit to anything or before you even view anything. If you're looking for a washer and dryer, I would ask, is there a washer and dryer in my apartment or in the unit? Is there a washer and dryer in the building? If so, what floor? Is there one on every floor? I would ask what amenities are included: gym, pool, private rooms, whatever it may be, rooftop deck. We really wanted to have a gym so we can utilize it. We haven't utilized it much, but we're still getting in the groove of things, so hopefully we start utilizing it more. I would also ask if the building accepts guarantors, because again, this is something that not every building accepts, so there is a possibility that if you do not make enough money to their standards, you will not get approved for the apartment. And then if they do not accept guarantors, then you cannot get that apartment. I mean, some buildings accept online guarantors. Some people accept like your mom is your guarantor if she makes enough money for that. Because the exception is that if you're getting a place, you have to make 40 times the rent. But if you get a guarantor, they have to make double that. So they have to make 80 times rent on their own. It's just even harder to get approved. I would also ask about transportation in the area. They'll be likely to kind of explain to you different routes on like how to get into the city, how to get in different areas of the city, and that'd just be a good point to know, especially if you're like me and we had no idea like how to get around yet. We wanted to make sure that we were in a good area. So I would say those are the top questions you might need to ask before you even view, or if you are currently viewing an apartment, because these are make or break things that might be deal or no deal for people. So when Carlos and I applied to our apartment, I was super stressed. Carlos was like living his best life, like just vibe, chillax, whatever. I was stressed because it was such a complicated experience. Like I wanted to make sure we got everything that we really wanted at a reasonable price, and then you feel like you're in a competition with all these people like applying, and it's so intense. But ultimately we ended up putting in an application for this one building, and then we ended up finding out that it was like a bad neighborhood, like one block over, and we were like, oh my gosh, this is so bad. And luckily we ended up getting like denied because all of a sudden they didn't want to accept our guarantor when they had told us in the beginning they were gonna accept it. So whatever, thank God we got denied out of that one. We were like, can we just get our security deposit back since we got denied? And luckily they were like, yes, because we asked that in the beginning. You ask like, if I give a security deposit and I don't get approved, do I get the money back? Super important, because some buildings might want to finesse you. We got our money back, and we ended up applying to our second option, which we ended up liking way more anyways, and we ended up getting approved. Everything went smoothly because we learned from our first mistake, and I just thought it would be fun to show you guys the struggle and give you a little bit of knowledge on how complicated the process might be. If there's anyone looking to move out of the state, you got to look into these things. If there's anyone looking to move to New York City specifically, this would be a great video for you to watch, and I hope that it was very beneficial and educational for you guys and that you enjoyed it. Don't forget to give this video a really big thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I hope I was very educational towards you and I helped you out if this was something that you were interested in, or maybe you just wanted to know because you were being nosy, because that's something I would do. Either way, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys soon.